How billions vanished overnight in the greatest heist ever pulled off. On a quiet evening in February 2016, something impossible happened inside the secure digital vaults of Bangladesh's central bank. There were no alarms, no masked men, no broken doors, just a few silent keystrokes, and nearly $1 billion began to move. At exactly 8:36 p.m., employees at the Bangladesh Bank headquarters in Dhaka had already gone home. The building, a concrete fortress of financial authority, stood still under the dim glow of streetlights. Inside, servers hummed quietly, processing routine transactions. Then suddenly, a series of unusual requests were sent through the global banking network known as SWIFT, the system trusted by banks worldwide to move trillions of dollars every day. These weren't small transfers. They were massive. Dozens of requests, each carefully crafted, instructing the Federal Reserve Bank of New York to transfer money out of Bangladesh Bank's account, one of the most secure accounts in the world. The destination? Accounts in the Philippines and Sri Lanka. At first, nothing seemed wrong. The requests looked legitimate. They had the correct codes, the right formatting, even the proper authorization signatures. But what no one realized at that moment was that the system had already been compromised. Miles away in another part of the world, someone was watching. Watching as the money moved. Watching as millions turned into hundreds of millions. Watching as one of the boldest financial heists in history unfolded in real time. By the time the first signs of trouble appeared, it was already too late. The next morning, bank officials in Dhaka noticed something strange. The printer connected to their SWIFT system, the one that logs transaction confirmations, had stopped working. It wasn't just jammed. It had been deliberately disabled. Panic began to creep in as IT staff scrambled to fix it. When they finally restored the system and began reviewing the logs, their worst fears started to take shape. Transaction after transaction, all unauthorized. Millions of dollars, gone. Then hundreds of millions. A total of 35 separate transfer requests had been sent. If all of them had gone through, nearly $1 billion would have vanished overnight. The room went silent. No one could understand how this was possible. There were supposed to be multiple layers of security, firewalls, authentication protocols, internal checks. Breaking into this system wasn't just difficult. It was considered nearly impossible. Yet someone had done it. And they had done it flawlessly. As the investigation began, the scale of the operation became even more disturbing. The hackers hadn't just guessed their way in. They had studied the system, learned its behavior, and exploited it with surgical precision. They knew exactly when to strike. During a weekend when staffing was low. They knew how to bypass detection. And most chilling of all, they knew how to cover their tracks. The malware used in the attack didn't just send fraudulent requests. It also manipulated the bank's internal records, hiding evidence and delaying discovery. It was as if the criminals were inside the bank, watching every move, guiding the heist from within. Meanwhile, in New York, something strange had caught the attention of officials at the Federal Reserve. Some of the transfer requests raised red flags. One in particular stood out. A request meant for a Sri Lankan organization contained a typo. Foundation was misspelled as Foundation. That single error triggered suspicion. And it may have just saved hundreds of millions of dollars. Because of that mistake, several transactions were halted. But not all. By the time the system shut down the rest, $81 million had already disappeared. Vanished into a maze of accounts in the Philippines, quickly laundered through casinos and scattered beyond reach. Back in Dhaka, investigators were racing against time. Who could have done this? Was it an insider? A foreign cybercrime syndicate? Or something even bigger? Then, as forensic experts dug deeper into the bank's systems, they found something that changed everything. A hidden piece of code. Not just malware, but a highly sophisticated digital weapon. One that had been used before in attacks targeting global financial institutions. And its signature pointed to a group that wasn't just after money, they were after power. And as investigators followed that digital trail, they realized this wasn't just a heist. It was part of something far more dangerous, and far from over. By the time investigators uncovered the malicious code buried deep inside Bangladesh bank systems, the case had already outgrown a simple financial crime. This wasn't just theft. It was a coordinated cyber operation, precise, patient, and terrifyingly advanced. Digital forensic teams began dissecting the malware line by line. What they found sent a chill through every agency involved. This wasn't code written overnight. It had been carefully engineered, tested, and deployed with military-like discipline. Even more disturbing, it had been inside the bank's network for weeks. possibly months. Watching, learning, waiting. As the investigation widened, international agencies were pulled in. Cybersecurity experts from the United States and Europe joined forces, tracing the attack across continents. Every digital breadcrumb led deeper into a shadowy network of servers, proxy locations, and false identities. But the hackers had anticipated this. They had routed their traffic through multiple countries, masking their true origin. Each step investigators took forward seemed to split into 10 more directions. It was like chasing a ghost. Meanwhile, the stolen $81 million was already moving fast. In the Philippines, the money had landed in several accounts at a local bank. Within hours, it was withdrawn, converted into local currency, and funneled into the country's casino system. Inside crowded, neon-lit gaming halls, millions of dollars were being washed clean through chips, bets, and cash-outs. By the time authorities caught up, the money had already changed hands countless times. The trail was dissolving. And with every passing hour, recovery became less likely. Back in Dhaka, suspicion began to turn inward. How had the attackers gained access in the first place? The answer came from an overlooked detail. A simple email. Months before the heist, several bank employees had received what appeared to be harmless job-related messages. Attached were files, resumes, documents, routine paperwork. But hidden inside one of those attachments was the entry point. A single click. That was all it took. The malware slipped silently into the system, bypassing outdated security defenses and embedding itself deep within the network. From there, it spread, mapping out the bank's infrastructure, identifying critical systems, and patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This wasn't luck. This was reconnaissance. Then came the breakthrough that shifted the entire investigation. Cybersecurity analysts noticed something eerily familiar about the malware structure. The coding patterns, the encryption methods, even the way it manipulated financial systems, it all matched previous attacks on banks across the globe. Attacks that had been quietly investigated and never fully solved. A name began to circulate among investigators. Not a person. A group. Highly organized, highly skilled, and incredibly dangerous. They had been linked to cyber attacks targeting financial institutions, governments, and corporations worldwide. Their operations weren't just about stealing money, they were strategic, deliberate, and often tied to something much larger than profit. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a bank robbery. It was part of a global campaign. But just as authorities started connecting the dots, things took a darker turn. One of the key intermediaries in the Philippines, a businessman linked to the bank accounts where the money first arrived, suddenly disappeared. No warning. No trace. Gone. At the same time, several critical records related to the transactions went missing. Surveillance footage from key locations was either corrupted or mysteriously erased. Witnesses who had initially cooperated became silent. Someone was cleaning up. And they were doing it fast. Pressure mounted as governments demanded answers. How could such a massive breach happen? How could criminals penetrate one of the world's most secure financial systems and walk away with millions? And more importantly, could it happen again? Investigators were running out of time and the trail was going cold. But then, just when it seemed like the hackers had covered every track, a small but crucial piece of evidence surfaced. A digital fingerprint hidden deep within the code, something the attackers had overlooked. It wasn't just a clue. It was a link. A connection to previous cyber attacks targeting banks in Asia, Europe, and even the United States. And when analysts finally traced that fingerprint back to its source, they uncovered a truth that was far more unsettling than anyone had imagined. This wasn't just the work of criminals hiding in the shadows. This was an operation backed by something far more powerful. Something with the resources, patience, and reach to strike anywhere in the world. And disappear without a trace. By the time investigators traced the final digital fingerprint, the case had already shaken the global financial system. But what they uncovered next didn't just explain the heist. It redefined it. The malware, the tactics, the precision, all of it pointed to a group known in cybersecurity circles as the Lazarus Group. A name whispered in high-level intelligence briefings, linked to some of the most sophisticated cyber attacks in modern history. This wasn't a loose network of hackers chasing money. This was a disciplined, state-backed operation. And according to multiple international investigations, the group had ties to North Korea. The motive suddenly became clearer, and far more alarming. This wasn't just about stealing millions. It was about funding a system under heavy international sanctions. A system cut off from global financial networks, forced to find other ways to survive. Cybercrime had become a weapon. Banks were the new battleground. And Bangladesh Bank had been one of the biggest targets ever successfully hit. But even as the truth began to surface, justice remained out of reach. The stolen $81 million had already been scattered through layers of laundering. A portion was recovered, but most of it was gone, absorbed into a system designed to make money disappear forever. In the Philippines, investigations exposed how casinos had been used as the final stage of the operation. Regulations at the time allowed massive amounts of cash to move without strict oversight, creating the perfect environment to erase the money trail. Officials, bankers, and intermediaries were questioned. Some were arrested. Others claimed ignorance. And a few simply vanished. Back in Bangladesh, the fallout was devastating. Trust in the banking system was shaken. Officials faced intense scrutiny, and questions lingered about how such a breach could go undetected for so long. The human cost wasn't measured in lives lost, but in something just as critical: confidence. Because if this could happen to a central bank, where else could it happen? Meanwhile, cybersecurity teams across the world began connecting the dots. The Bangladesh heist wasn't an isolated event. Similar attacks had been attempted, and in some cases successfully carried out, against banks in Vietnam, Ecuador, Poland, and beyond. The pattern was undeniable. The same tools, the same methods, the same invisible enemy. This was a global campaign, and it was still ongoing. What made the case even more chilling was how close the attackers came to stealing far more. If not for a single typo, one small mistake in a transfer request, nearly $1 billion could have vanished completely. One spelling error. That was the difference between the largest heist in history and something even bigger. Years later, the case remains partially unsolved. No dramatic arrests. No final courtroom showdown. Just a trail of digital evidence pointing to a powerful entity that operates beyond traditional reach. The kind of adversary that doesn't need guns or masks, just code and patience. Today, banks have strengthened their defenses. Security systems are more advanced, monitoring is tighter, and awareness has grown. But the reality is hard to ignore. The battlefield has changed. The next heist won't come with sirens or alarms. It will come quietly. Through a network. Through a screen. Through a single moment of vulnerability. And somewhere right now, someone could be watching, learning, waiting, just like they did before. Because the greatest heist ever pulled off wasn't just about the money that vanished overnight. It was about proving that even the most secure systems in the world can be broken. And the people behind it? They were never really caught. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for what's coming next. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.